Great, so I think we're going to go ahead and begin. It's now a couple of minutes after 3. Thank you everyone very much for joining us for our very first Zoom webinar. So you'll have to forgive us if we make any technical errors along the way. This, among many things, is very new to us here during the current COVID-19 crisis. We do appreciate you taking some time to learn a little bit about what the Ottawa Food Bank has been doing in the Ottawa community, all through your very generous support. During this Zoom webinar, you do have the option to ask questions. You'll notice at the bottom there is something called the Q&A. You can pose questions through that. We ask that you save your questions for the end, but if you do have a very burning question, we hope that you will use the Q&A at that time. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Obviously I can't see you and I can't hear you, so I will allow you to use the Q&A if you are having any issues. I'm going to pass this over to Mike. I will let you all know that we are recording this webinar so that it can be shared later on, but just also so that you are aware that it is currently being recorded. So I didn't introduce myself. My name is Rachel Wilson. I'm the Director of Communications and Development here at the Ottawa Food Bank. And it's my pleasure to turn it over now to Michael Maidman, our CEO. He's going to walk through some slides for you about the current support and crisis situation here in Ottawa, and we'll go from there.
All right, so I'll just take a moment here and share my screen with you. Okay, so we have our fingers crossed that all this technology works out for us. So thanks, first of all, for making the time to join us on this webinar. And I wanted to start with another thank you, and that is that, you know, the Ottawa Food Bank depends on your donations and the community support. We normally don't get support from government, be it provincial government. We do get some support from the municipal government, and we certainly don't get support from the federal government. So, you know, to receive that support during a pandemic is unusual, but, you know, I characterize the Ottawa Food Bank as the community's response to people in need, to ensure that no one is being left behind. And for me, I think that's what the Ottawa Food Bank represents, is a community that's coming together to care for anyone who needs that kind of help. So, and that is certainly something that we're seeing a lot during COVID-19. This is something that has really changed very quickly for us. I mean, I think back to the middle of March when, you know, we all watched on the news what was happening. We saw that there was this virus that was making its way first through China, through Europe, and then reaching North America. And, you know, we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know how serious it was. And then, you know, all of a sudden we reached, you know, the week before March break, we heard the announcement that schools in Ontario would close. And then I think all of a sudden it became very, very serious. And we started to understand what the risks were in our community, to those who had compromised immune systems, to those who are elderly. And that is really when our response as an organization happened. Early on, we heard public health officials tell people to stock up, to get 2 weeks of food and put that food in your pantry and be ready so that you can self-isolate. Of course, you know, the Ottawa Food Bank takes care of nearly 40,000 people every single month. Those people don't necessarily know what food to put on their table tonight or tomorrow night or the weekend, let alone, you know, stock up on 2 weeks. So that's when it really began for us. People started to turn to the Ottawa Food Bank looking for that assistance with food. We immediately began to work with Ottawa Public Health. We wanted to make sure that we were caring for our community, but we wanted to make sure that we were doing it in a safe way. And so one of the first things that we did was work with Ottawa Public Health to design a food distribution system that could keep, you know, both our staff and our volunteers at food banks across the community safe, and the people that we serve safe. And so what we decided to do early on was to move to a hamper model. We would normally prefer a shopping model where we would invite people to come into a food bank and then make choices about the food that they and their families need. However, we realized that we needed to keep that physical distance of 2 meters in place and to reduce that contact wherever possible. So we moved to a hamper model. We began to ship food and ship supplies such as boxes to our community food banks, and then they would prepare emergency hampers and put those hampers together for people in the community, and then attempt to provide that hamper and reduce contact. So doing simple steps like putting a hamper on a table and then stepping back and allowing that individual to pick up that hamper. It also became very clear very quickly that delivery was going to play an important role. We had, of course, messaging from public health officials telling everyone to stay home as much as possible to reduce contact. And we had a population in our community over 70 that was at a higher risk. And we knew that we needed to put delivery in place. And so we quickly reached out to a number of different groups in the community. One of those groups was the Salvation Army, whose volunteers worked with us very closely to begin the delivery of hampers to individuals. And then as we got deeper into our response to the pandemic, we started to expand delivery as we understood all of those groups of people who needed support through delivery. Think of a situation with a young parent, a single parent, for example, who, if that parent needed to go to a food bank, would have to take his or her children. And that would be difficult, exposing potentially the children. And so we expanded our delivery criteria larger and larger, and began to work with more and more groups in the community so that we could continue to make those deliveries. One of the other things that we began to do, we started to see that there was an issue with the supply chain. And if any of you were shopping in grocery stores over this period of time, famously, we all bought toilet paper, it seems, more toilet paper than any of us ever needed. But there were other items that were running out at store shelves as well. And that meant that the supply chain was under pressure, and there simply wasn't enough inventory in some of those key food items. We ran into that too. We purchase, normally about $1.6 million worth of food in a year. So a lot of bulk food purchases, but a lot of those items that we were trying to get from our suppliers, we could not get. And so one of the things that we did was we reached out to our suppliers to try and, refill our shelves. But when we couldn't, we switched tactics. And, a word that has become very widely used during this pandemic has been pivot. And, maybe overused, in fact, but one of the things that we did was pivot during that time. And we provided grocery store gift cards to individuals as well. So that did two things for us from a tactic point of view. It allowed us to provide these gift cards to families that they could go to grocery stores and they could make the choices of food and items that they needed. It helped to give our network a break. So we work in a network of 112 agencies. They were working at a fever pace, just trying to keep up with demand in the early weeks of the pandemic. So one of the things that providing gift cards did was allow them to take a bit of a breather. And it allowed us to refill our shelves, because retailers, when there was a supply chain shortage, they were refilling stores first. And so by providing those gift cards, we allowed people to go to the stores where the food was, circumvent some of those supply chain issues that we were seeing in our food inventory here at the Ottawa Food Bank. That was an investment that we made of just over $550,000 to assist all of those families for that 2-week period with these gift cards. The other thing that we wanted to do was to provide support to our network. I mentioned a minute ago that we provide support to 112 agencies across the city. The core of that is a group of community food banks, 26 community food banks. Those are located in all the communities across the city, and they're the the front line of food banking during this pandemic, they had a lot of different challenges and a lot of different needs. And one of the things that happened at those community food banks as soon as the pandemic started in our community is they lost volunteers. Many of the volunteers who volunteer at our food banks are older, and so they were at risk, and they very quickly stopped volunteering, which put a lot of pressure on food banks. So not only did they lose volunteers, but they had many, many more people coming to them looking for assistance with food. And so one of the things that we were able to do because of your support is to provide additional financial support to that network of 26 community food banks. So we invested $650,000 to provide each of those community food banks with $25,000 of support, which would allow them to cope with all of the additional expenses that they were seeing. So purchasing additional food, hiring additional staff, doing all of the things that they needed to do to ensure that they were meeting demand in their local communities across the city. We're certainly seeing, you know, a lot of additional spending. I talked about the $550,000 in gift cards, the $650,000 in grants to member agencies that we made. We've had to invest in additional staffing support just simply to keep up with the demand that we're getting. We saw an incredible increase in calls from the community, people reaching out to us for assistance. Over a 5-week period, we saw an increase of 528% in the number of calls that we would normally field. And so just keeping up with those calls, you know, our staff were coming in the morning and receiving, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80 messages from people looking for assistance with food. And not just a simple, you know, tell me where my food bank is, really complex situations that people were facing. You know, if we had an individual who had a mobility issue and simply couldn't get out of their home to get food, you know, they reached out to us and we had to make arrangements with our volunteers to do that delivery for them. So just dealing with some of those additional needs has meant some additional costs for us to keep up with staffing. You can see on your screen, you know, $277,000 in extra purchases, even things that we wouldn't think of, such as boxes, the number of hampers that we're distributing. We've spent a substantial amount of money in boxes just to distribute that food to people throughout the community. So in total, so far in the first 5 weeks of action in responding to COVID-19, we've invested nearly $1.5 million in that effort across the community. That has meant over 665,000 pounds of food that we've provided throughout that member agency network that I've been talking about this afternoon, and 172 deliveries directly to people in their homes. So these are potentially young parents or seniors or people with compromised immune systems that we've needed to support with those deliveries. This is one of our trucks. We operate a fleet of 4 vehicles, so 4 5-ton vehicles. We would typically ship about 14 tons of food every single day leaving from our warehouse here on Michael Street. And this is just one of those trucks, and it shows the skids of hampers. We've done 2 things during this time. Part of our strategy as an organization is to ensure that all of our food banks can operate during this time. So a business continuity plan where we can support our food banks across the community no matter what happens. One example of that was a food bank that had a staff member that had a suspected case of COVID-19. And when that staff member was ill, the center had to shut its doors as a precaution while that person was receiving a test to confirm whether or not it was COVID-19. But from our strategy, our business continuity strategy, one of the things that we were able to do was to shift some of those clients to reach out to surrounding community food banks so that we could meet their needs. And the other thing that we did was we received clients here at the Ottawa Food Bank. So we had the Ottawa Food Bank staff set up a mobile food bank here in our warehouse building. And we use these boxes that you're seeing photos of now. So our volunteers, of course, we've had to sort food in a different way. And if any of you have ever been here sorting food, we have nearly 3,000 volunteers that help us to sort food every single year. That's the equivalent of almost 13 full-time people. Well, we had our volunteers do this food sorting and create these hampers. And while creating these hampers, doing so using physical distancing. So we've actually had to adapt the way that we do that in our warehouse, and we've built some temporary walls so that we can create zones, safe zones, if you will, where our volunteers can work and create these hampers. So in the example that I'm sharing about Rita Rockcliffe having to close, we were able to use these hampers to distribute to those members of the community who needed our assistance. So we've created a new normal. I mean, we keep talking about, will we go back to normal? When will we get back to normal? And, what does normal look like? Well, I think it's fair to say that we're in for a new normal. We can certainly see other examples in history that have caused changes. And, in recent history, I think an example is 9/11. We can certainly see air travel before 9/11 and after 9/11, and we know that it's really drastically changed. I think it's true to say that food insecurity, food banks are working in a new normal now. So far, what we've seen is 15% of the people who turned to a food bank over the last month were new clients. So we're seeing really many different types of people turn to us. We're hearing a lot of stories about individuals needing a food bank now because they've lost employment. That is certainly a very common theme that we're hearing at food banks right across the community. That loss of employment has caused them to turn to a food bank. We have, of course, seen a response from the provincial and the federal government. But when we talk about a new normal, we're anticipating what the need will be in the community once some of those programs that the government has introduced go away. We can think back to the financial downturn in 2008. We saw a pretty dramatic increase of food bank use right across Canada, just over 28% nationally. And while Ottawa in some ways is considered recession-proof, given the large number of public servants that we have and a great high-tech sector that really keeps employment moving in our community, there's no doubt that there will be a significant impact, an economic impact following this pandemic. So we're preparing ourselves, for that new normal now, so that we can continue to meet need in the community moving forward. I mentioned our volunteers. This is some of what we've done to move around our warehouse. We've created these temporary walls. Normally, we would have as many as 25 to 30 volunteers all working elbow to elbow, sorting food and going through quite a lot of food. Actually, in a shift, we have 2 shifts of volunteers each day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And these temporary walls that you can see allow us to keep our volunteer groups separated and at a safe distance so that we can keep that food moving. One of the things when I mentioned new normal that has changed for us, last week, we actually sorted the last bin of donated food in our warehouse. And in my 7 years with the Ottawa Food Bank, I have never seen a warehouse where we didn't have donated food. Typically, we would have food that we raised at Christmas time that would fill our warehouse still at this time of the year. But one of the things that the pandemic has meant is that food donations in grocery stores are not being made. You know, those bins that sit in the stores and collect the community's donations for us are not being filled. And I think people are focusing on filling their pantries. I think going to the grocery store is often a very uncertain and sometimes scary situation. That, you know, when families go grocery shopping or individuals go grocery shopping, they're getting into the store and they're getting back out of the store as quickly as they can and as safely as they can. And we've also seen a shift, certainly, in the number of people who are purchasing food online, getting groceries delivered using a service like Instacart, or more and more ordering from online services such as Amazon. And we're certainly seeing people use services like PC Express, where you don't even have to enter into a grocery store. You know, from a convenience point of view, you could probably, before the pandemic, order your groceries and get a slot to pick up those groceries the next day. Now, I think in some situations, it's taking as much as 10 days for you to be able to get a slot to pick up your groceries. So all of that has meant that we're not getting those donations in stores. So we're relying heavily now on purchased food. I mentioned that we would normally spend about $1.6 million a year purchasing food. You know, we will eclipse that total during the pandemic any day now. And one of the things that we're looking at when we're looking at a new normal is how much money will we need to purchase that food for the community if we don't have that donated food that's going to come into our warehouse and keep things moving for us and make sure that we have the support and the supplies to meet a growing demand in the community. So I think that's probably, Rachel, you know, my overview of what we've done so far. I started with this, and I want to end with this, that our organization depends on that support from the community, that support that you generously give us. And we would not be able to rise up and meet this need in the community if it wasn't for your support. You know, so I want to again express how grateful we are to have your support, that trust that you've given us with your financial gifts and support. And, you know, we're certainly working hard across the city to make sure that we're putting your support to good use and meeting that demand out there in the community.
Thank you, Mike. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get you to stop sharing the screen, if you don't mind. Great. So what we'll do now is we'll ask people to use the Q&A to ask some questions of Michael. We will go through them as they come up. I do also have two colleagues that are assisting, Joey and Sam. They will answer some questions that we're not able to get to. But Mike, I wondered if you could start off talking about how some of the volunteers have been so helpful during this current crisis.
Yeah, we've really, I've really been surprised by the number of volunteers who have reached out to us. And, you know, these are sometimes businesses maybe where, you know, I'm thinking of a car dealership that called us, you know, immediately after the pandemic started and said, you know, we're not selling a lot of cars right now, but we'd really like to be involved in supporting the Ottawa Food Bank. You know, we've had people that have continued to reach out to us. And so we've created these emergency hampers here. We started by creating a supply of 3,000 emergency hampers that we have here in our warehouse. And we keep, as we distribute those hampers, we keep creating more hampers. So that's really been an incredible help to us. But we've also had volunteers play that key role of delivering to individuals. You know, the longer that we go in this pandemic, the more that we realize that there are you know, people that need this individual delivery. And so that's something that our volunteers are helping us to do.
Thanks for that, Mike. I'm just going to pull up another question here. Can you talk a little bit about how clients accessing the food bank has changed during the COVID-19 crisis? How often a client might be able to access a food bank, and what is sort of the change in the amount of food that they're receiving?
So we would typically provide 3 to 5 days of food to an individual, and we would do that once a month. Um, you know, from a safety point of view and from a needs point of view, we've increased that to 7 days of food. And we are providing food more often to families. This pandemic has caused a number of challenges, especially for those that are at risk. And so one of the things we want to make sure is that we provide people with enough food. So we're giving a larger supply. So that's meant that the food that we're shipping to our agencies across the city, we're actually shipping more of that food right now. And we're providing food more often during this time. So we're actually going through and shipping a lot more food than we would typically in a normal month right now.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the priority needs of the food bank right now?
Yeah, certainly. One of the big things is fresh food is one of the priority needs for us. We understand that the people we serve are often in poor health. People who live in poverty have poorer health than the general population. So one of the things that we think a lot about and prioritize at the Ottawa Food Bank is fresh food. So not only getting food to people, but being sure that we can get, things like milk and bread, eggs, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit. And we're also thinking about kids right now. I mean, school is not in session, of course, and so kids that would rely on a school breakfast program, they may need a little extra assistance right now as well. So we're thinking about, enough food, making sure that we have a nutritious balance in that food that we're providing, and thinking about kids as well, and then prioritizing deliveries to individuals who can't get out to a food bank for help.
During times like this, Peter is asking, do you have enough physical space in our current warehouse? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's prioritized that question of physical space. We have a current lease that's due to expire in March 2022. And one of the things that we're doing, as we're establishing a bit of a new normal, one of the things that we're thinking about is, what do we need from a space response? So we have a strategic financial model that we've created. I won't get into all of the details of that because it may bore many of you, but what this strategic financial model allows us to do is to try and estimate what the impact of these additional clients is going to have on our situation. Everything from the number of staff that we have, the size of the warehouse space that we have, the amount of food that we'll need to provide. So it really helps us to model what the impact of this pandemic is going to be. And as we work through that financial modeling right now, I believe that we're quickly going to realize that we'll be out of space. One of the practical things that we have to think about is our office space, and in our offices, many of us share offices, and if we need to physically distance from each other, we couldn't have two people share a fairly small office space. So most of the office staff right now are working from home. We may have to continue that for a longer term, and we may need to rethink about our office design and setup and the amount of warehouse space that we have.
There are many questions and concerns around what this is going to mean financially for the Ottawa Food Bank, given how much that we've spent in the last couple of weeks just to meet this immediate demand. What do you think the future is going to look like for the Ottawa Food Bank financially, and are you confident that we'll be able to continue to provide the level of service that we have?
Yeah, it's also a big concern for us in that emergency response. And one of the things that I think is very good is that the provincial government and the federal government have stepped in. The federal government announced $100 million to the food bank sector $50 million to the Food Banks Canada sector, and we're one of the agencies connected to the Food Banks Canada network across Canada. So we've begun to receive funds from the federal government, which are going to help for that emergency response. So we certainly have, I think, a couple of different segments here. We have, as the pandemic began, we've definitely got a crisis response. And then we have some of the funds that were made available, some of the programs that were made available by the provincial government and by the federal government that have helped to tamp down some of that demand. So we've seen an early sharp increase in the first 5 weeks that we've been talking about this afternoon. Now we expect to go through a period where, the federal programs that have been created will start to temper some of that demand over the short term. And then provincially, we've got, a provincial investment in programs to assist individuals who are recipients of social assistance. So that's going to help on that demand side. The other thing provincially that's occurring is that the provincial government has made a significant investment of funds to purchase food with the Provincial Association of Food Banks called Feed Ontario. The Ottawa Food Bank we've already begun to receive emergency hampers from that program. We expect to receive over the next several weeks 43,800 hampers. And these hampers will provide 1 week of food in each hamper. We'll bolster that non-perishable hamper with some fresh items for families, but that's going to take a lot of the pressure off the Ottawa Food Bank because that will be a significant supply of food. And so we'll see the need and the expenditures decline slightly. But I'd be lying not to say that, we have to be concerned about the future and what the economic impact over the long term will be. Because, we did see after 2008, food bank use increased nationally by 28.8%, and that set a new high watermark for food bank use across Canada. If we were to see the same kind of impact following this pandemic, then we would certainly have concern about, meeting that demand long term.
Great. There's quite a few people asking about volunteer opportunities. So if you don't mind, I'll just say a few words about that. You can go onto our website and sign up for volunteer opportunities. Our farm out in Stittsville called the Community Harvest Farm will be up and running shortly. Unfortunately, this bizarre May weather means that it's not quite ready for planting yet. Our potatoes are going to freeze if we try and plant them, but hopefully the farm will be up and running soon. Unfortunately, without any donated food, we currently don't have any warehouse shifts for sorting food, but you can go on to, as I said, onto ottawafoodbank.ca and register as a volunteer then, and you'll be able to select opportunities for yourself. There was also a question about high school students. Currently, given the current crisis, we are asking for people to be over the age of 18, and that is just to limit the amount of exposure for children, asking people to stay home as much as possible. Normally, we do have a high school program that runs in the summer. We will, of course, be examining whether or not that will happen this year, but we just wanted to let people know that there are still many volunteer opportunities, including deliveries. You just have to go onto our website and sign up as a volunteer, and those opportunities will be there for you. Mike, can you talk a little bit about how food is distributed amongst all of the agencies, how that typically happens?
Yeah, so typically what we do is work with each individual agency to establish what the need in their community is. There's quite a range between those 26 community food banks, between the number of people that they each see in their community. So we work with those agencies to establish an inventory level. We have an inventory management system here at our warehouse, and we have an online ordering system. So we essentially establish an inventory in each of the categories of food that we distribute, whether it be non-perishable, whether it be baby food, baby diapers, baby items, or items that are donated to us. So we establish those inventory levels, the agencies order through an online ordering system, and then we ship to the agency once a week. And so each agency gets their order at a different time. We have that fleet of 4 or 5 ton vehicles that ships food to each agency each week. And normally we would have about 14 tons of food leave our warehouse each morning. They start to roll pretty early in the morning doing their deliveries, and then they're picking up food donations and recovering food, rescuing food throughout the afternoon and coming back to the warehouse with that recovered food that we get into our fridges and freezers.
And then I think we have time for maybe one more question. There was a question about the role of fresh food right now. Can you talk a little bit more about the fresh food? I know typically, obviously the Ottawa Food Bank provides almost 50% fresh food. Has that changed during this crisis?
No, we're still really focused on fresh food. And it's interesting actually that from a supply chain point of view, some of the outages and some of the empty shelves that we saw were really non-perishable items. The fresh items in the supply chain on the fresh side seem to be going pretty well. You know, I know that there were some stories in the media about, you know, issues with pork or issues with milk. But we were seeing from our side that the vendors that we work with were able to continue to get us, you know, the fresh food. Fresh food is a very important component of what we do. You know, Rachel just mentioned that we're at 50% of the food that we distribute is fresh, and that's been a number that we've been, you know, working very, very hard over the last number of years to increase. You know, nutrition and the health of the people we serve is definitely prioritized. You know, we've kept that fresh food going. I know there was a question earlier about our community harvest program. We have a farm, you know, with almost 1,000 volunteers who help us every summer. Last year, we grew 136,000 pounds at that farm. And we continue to make investments in that program so that we can provide those fresh vegetables during the summer months. But, you know, unfortunately in Ottawa, we don't grow much during the winter. And so, you know, another program that we've created and continue to invest in is a program that allows us to buy fruits and vegetables during the winter. There was a time when, you know, during the winter, we would distribute food that was in a box or a can. And now we have this great program called Refresh, which we've been able to create and expand, and it provides fruits and vegetables throughout the winter months. So we try to make it really seamless. We've got Refresh running right up until we begin to harvest at our farm. And if we could just get some warmer weather and, you know, get things growing out there, you know, we've got a great cold storage that system that we installed last year, which is going to really help us to grow and store more food than we ever have before.
Thanks for that, Mike. And thanks to everyone for all the questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we will try and to answer them as we wrap up here. Additionally, if you have a question that wasn't answered, please feel free to email any of us, foodbank@ottawafoodbank.ca. That's foodbank, one word, @ottawafoodbank.ca, and we will answer your question. Mike, I hope you'll be able to do this again with us. We're going to do another webinar in a couple of weeks to talk about what has changed since this webinar. This covered the first 5 weeks, and as we know, every week is different and changing, so we will be hosting another one later on, and we hope you'll all be able to join us then. And we will be sharing the link to this webinar so that if you want to share with your friends or colleagues, we'll happily do that as well. Be sure to go to ottawafoodbank.ca for more information. We keep it updated so that people are aware how they can access food. If you have friends or neighbors who might need support, there is a lookup tool that you can use to find the food program that's closest to you, as well as the hours that they are available. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can always give us a call at 613-745-7001, and we're happy to help. Again, on behalf of all of us and on behalf of Mike, thank you so much for your incredible support. Thank you so much for your time today. We're very appreciative, and we hope that this has provided a little bit of insight as to how you have made a significant impact here in the Ottawa community. We wish you all the best, and we wish you to continue to be safe and healthy and staying home with your family during these very challenging and different times here in Ottawa. Thank you so much again, and we hope to see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everybody.